with that tunnel vision, he has the ability to look into a person and see that creative purpose for which God has created them, and to be able to encourage you to call that forth and to dare to step into that for who you are. So would you please sit up and listen today to Mr. Emmanuel?
All right, can you hear me now? Great, awesome. Welcome back, Nyack. First and foremost, I want to give a shout out to all the freshmen and the transfers. If you are a freshman or transfer, can you please stand up so we can welcome to Nyack. We hope you feel at home. We hope you make this your home. Where are the sophomores? Sophomores. Woo! Where are the sophomores? Where are the juniors? And last but not least, the graduated seniors. Congratulations, you made it this far. I'm happy for you. So, jumping right in. People have been asking me, how was your summer? Like, what were some highlights? What was going on during the summer? And I'm like, summer was great. But the real question is, how was the country's summer? Because so much was going on this summer, even in the past month. Like, we had an eclipse, we had nuclear threats, we had white supremacy, we had a hurricane. Like, stuff is just going on like left and right. Like, you just got to grab a bucket of popcorn and be like, what's going on? Like, it's going to be World War III. Like, everything's just going crazy. And I'm not necessarily usually political at all. So I usually get like weirded out when Christians like overreact to what's going on in the media, like it's the end of the world, Trump is the Antichrist, it's the end times, things like this. But like it's always been the end of the world, and ever since the Bible was written, we've been living in the end times. And so I just want to remind you that despite everything that's going on, Jesus is still in control. And I know it might sound like, Christianese, and like, you have to say that. And sometimes it doesn't feel like Jesus is in control. And you want to be like, Jesus, do you watch the news? Like, do you see what's happening? Can you get something? But this semester's theme is, I am willing. As in, Jesus is saying, I am willing. Where we not only, despite how many things are going on in the country and around the world, not only is Jesus able to change things, but he is willing to change things. And we as a nation may be looking up and wondering, Jesus, if you're willing, you can save us. And I believe Jesus is looking back and he's saying, I will. And so that had nothing to do with my sermon. I just wanted to say that. I'm just kidding. It had everything to do with the sermon. It was a perfect segue. So we're going to go from talking about the country. Now we're going to talk about you. And today's sermon is called He is Willing. And I want to show you 4 things that Jesus is willing to do for you this semester. Are you ready? Ready. All right. You don't sound ready, but that's okay. All right. Pray with me. Jesus, I want to lift up these students to you right now. I lift up this message that you've given me to you, and I ask that you would open everyone's ears and open their eyes to see and hear what you want them to see and hear this morning. And I pray that you would increase and I would decrease, and that they would see more of you and less of me, and see how much you are willing to intervene in their lives today. And I pray this in your name. Amen. Amen. Today I want to talk to you about a story where Jesus met a man with leprosy. And spoiler alert, Jesus heals the man. And before we get into that, I want to give a little background on what leprosy is, so that you can understand why this story is important. So bear with me, just a little bit of a nerd moment with biology. So leprosy in the Bible, in the Old Testament, was a broad disease, broad term that applied to like a whole multiple number of diseases. You had a rash, you had a boil, you were too ashy, like it was leprosy. Like leprosy was just like a blanket term for a lot of things. But in the New Testament, leprosy usually meant a particular disease that scientists today call Hansen's disease. And Hansen's disease is a disease that attacks the nervous system. And what it does is it cuts off all feeling to different parts of the body. So the victims can't feel anything in their hands, in their feet, in their ears, in their nose, in their eyes, and they can't feel any pain. And because they can't feel pain, then burns go untreated, wounds become infected. Leprosy victims have had rats eat their fingers while they're sleeping because they can't feel anything. And so we don't like pain, but leprosy is a disease where you don't have pain, and because you don't have pain, you slowly die from the inside out. And some doctors will say, like, the best gift that I can give my leprosy victims is the gift of pain. And so leprosy eats the victims from the inside out. They lose their blinking reflex in their eyes, and so dust gets in the eyes, and they eventually get infected and get blind. Noses sometimes fall off, and so it slowly kills them from the inside out. Not only that, but it's contagious, and so people who touch lepers can get leprosy too. If the leper coughs on you or sneezes on you, then you can get leprosy too. So when someone got leprosy, they were moved out of their home. They had a family, they lost their family. They had a job, they lost their business. So when you had leprosy, it ruined your entire life. And it wasn't just a biblical disease, it's a disease that still happens in some parts of the world in certain developing countries. The good news is there's a cure for leprosy, and 95% of the human population is immune to it. But in Jesus' day, there was no cure, and nobody was immune. So if you had leprosy, your life was done. And this is where our story begins, with a man who had leprosy, and his life was essentially finished. And so I'm going to read what happened when Jesus met this man. In Matthew 8, it says, and Jesus stretched out his hand, and let's go back a little bit. Verse 1. Matthew, yes. When he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Next one. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. So this leper comes to Jesus having leprosy, and he comes to Jesus and asks him to heal him. And Jesus stretches out his hand and he touches him. The first thing I want you to know is that Jesus is willing to touch you, no matter how dirty you think you are. Remember, this man has leprosy. His skin is being eaten out from the inside out, eaten alive from the inside out. And Jesus is still willing to touch him, despite the fact that nobody else would want to touch him. And I want you to imagine to yourself, you don't have to say it out loud, what is the grossest thing that you have ever had to touch? I want you to hold that in your mind for a second as I tell you this story about one time I had to touch something very disturbing. When I was in college, I went on a business trip to Manhattan, and we worked at a homeless shelter. It doesn't sound like a mission trip because, like, it wasn't like in another country, but it was still like missions work. So we were in Manhattan, and we were in this homeless shelter called the Bowery Mission. Anybody heard of the Bowery Mission? Wonderful, awesome. So it's a great ministry. We were working there, and everything was going awesome, meeting God, doing great things. And then one day they brought a homeless man into the shelter, and he was on a wheelchair, and his legs had been amputated. But they hadn't been amputated correctly, so they were infected, and there were maggots eating everything. And so, on top of that, this man had just defecated on himself, and it was everywhere. And so they rolled him in, and a group of men rolled him into the shower to clean him up. And I saw this, and it was me and my friend, an international Japanese student named Chu, and we saw this, and my first response was, that's all, folks. Like, I'm going. Like, that's it. Like, it's time for dinner. Like, you guys do you. And Chu looks at me, and his first response, dead serious, like, we're gonna help him, right? And I'm like, screw you. Everything that you stand for. And Chu just like immediately goes to help this guy. He's like, I'm here for this. Like, he goes and no gloves, just like floop, floop. And I'm sitting there like, so I go in and I'm like trying to keep the distance, like, this is not okay, I'm not here for this, this is not what Christianity is about, this is ungodly. And I'm just like, this is the worst thing I've ever had to do. Like, I'm cool, like, I'm fine getting my hands dirty, doing parkour, like, it's great, but like, this is not like that, this is, so I'm there complaining in my head, and in the midst of me complaining, God speaks to me very clearly. And isn't it funny how God will speak to you real clearly when you're being a baby? And so I'm there complaining, and I hear the Lord say, your sin smells worse than this.
Wow.
But I was willing to come down and die for you anyway. And now I'm like, so I go, all right, let's do it. I'm here now. Let's go, boom. And the point was this, your sin smells to God. Your crap smells just like everybody else's crap. You can't look at the person next to you and say, I'm better than you, because your sin smells just as bad. But Jesus was still willing to come down and touch you. He was still willing to come down and save you. There's nothing that you've done in your past that is so bad that Jesus isn't willing to touch it and redeem it. No part of your past that is so broken that he's not willing to reach out and restore it. Jesus is willing to touch you no matter how dirty you think you are. Second thing about this is, Jesus didn't have to touch this man. He's healed people before by just saying the word. He spit on a blind guy's eye and made him like see. He's moonwalking on oceans, turning Poland Spring to fine wine. Like, he doesn't have to touch anybody, but he touches this guy. And this shows us, secondly, that Jesus is willing to go above and beyond for you. That we might understand that in our heads, but it's difficult to really believe it, because it seems like we believe that Jesus is like, halfway kind of God, but when he blesses you, he'll bless you halfway. Like, God will heal you, but, you still be limping a little bit. Like, he'll provide for you, but, like, you're still going to struggle now and then. He'll give you a spouse, but he's going to be butt ugly. Like, looks like a platypus, but he's godly. Like, we have these ideas, like, that God just, for some reason, just doesn't want to fully bless you. Like, he's just always going to hold back. Like, there's always going to be something to complain about. Like, he's always like, he's stingy. But the Bible says he came so that you can have life and have it more abundantly, and that he's able to do above all that you ask and think. And Jesus this is not like a prosperity gospel thing. This is just that Jesus is willing, when he's a good father. So when he blesses you all the way. And where I've seen this the most clearly in my life is in watching my parents grow up. So when we were little, we weren't very rich. We weren't very well off. Our house looked some kind of way where we stopped getting mail after a certain point, because the mailman thought that nobody lived there because it looked so abandoned. Now, I was 6 years old, so I was like, oh, it looks like a haunted house, like it's cool. But it was just like, apparently it just looked really bad. And so that's where we started. Now, God gave my parents a vision one day of opening up a Christian daycare, because there weren't any Christian daycares in the community at the time. So God gave them the vision, and my parents are like, the way things are set up and finances, like between the mortgage, the insurance, and the car payments, like, we don't have money to start this daycare. But God, if you gave the vision, then you'll also give the provision. And so they trusted God, and they started their daycare off with one baby in the living room. Now, 10 years later, that one baby in one living room became 3 daycares in 3 buildings in 3 different cities. God took that vision and he tripled it. They thought it was just going to be one daycare in one house, and then God just did abundantly above that. On top of that, the haunted house that people thought was abandoned got renovated, and people literally would come knocking on our door thinking that the mayor lived there. Where God just turned it all around, because he's willing to do above and beyond for you. And some of you in here are living testimonies of that. Some of you thought you never would have made it out of high school, but here you are in college, getting your bachelor's. Some of you thought that you didn't know where the money was coming from, but now the bills are getting paid. And some of you had classes that you had no business getting A's in, but you got the A's. He's willing to go above and beyond. And some of you might be sitting there thinking, well, none of those have happened to me. Your time is coming. Because regardless of what it is, Jesus is still willing to go above and beyond for you. Now, I want to pull back for a little bit and shift gears, because everybody was excited and was motivated and clapping and feels good. Right now, I want to dial it back for a little bit, because there's a part of the story that isn't included in the gospel, but it adds a little darker dimension to this. Because in Leviticus 13, this is what it says about leprosy. The leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose. And he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. So the leper has to be cast outside of society and live alone. But it wasn't because people just made up these rules because they didn't like lepers. He was cast out because God said to cast him out. And so I can't help but wonder if while the leper is approaching Jesus, I'm wondering if he's feeling some kind of tension. Like if he's wondering, what do you do when Jesus is the only person who can heal him, but he's also the main person who is the reason why he's in this situation in the first place? What do you do when it feels like the person who can help you is also the main reason that you have the problem to begin with? Like, what do you do if you're struggling with your sexuality and, am I gay? Am I lesbian? Am I bisexual? You know that God loves you even if you're gay, but the reason people judge you is because God said it's a sin to be gay. So what do? You know that God will forgive you for getting drunk and high for the weekend, but the reason people judge you is because God says not to get drunk and high. You know God will forgive you for losing your virginity and getting an abortion, but the reason people judge you see where I'm going? Have you ever felt like God is the only person who can help you, but he's also the main person who has hurt you? Have you ever felt that way? So I'm wondering if the leper is in this position where he sees Jesus and he's wondering, Jesus, you're the only person who can heal me, but I lost my family because of you. I lost my whole house, my home because of you. I got cast out of society because of you. I'm wondering, you don't always feel like worshiping God. Sometimes you find yourself blaming him for everything that has happened to you because it looks like God isn't for you, that he is against you. And this is how the leper might have felt. And it would be so easy to stay there and just blame God for everything that happens. But the leper doesn't do that. The Bible says that he came to Jesus and he knelt before him. Instead of staying in that place of wrestling and blaming God, he blesses Jesus. He worships him. He has the Job mentality where though he slayed me, yet will I trust in him. That sometimes it's easy to stay there and blame God, but we just sang about breakthrough. Sometimes the thing that blocks our breakthrough is that we just want to blame God instead of blessing him. And sometimes all it takes is praying through that. Being willing to worship him even though you don't fully get it. I call this grown man theology. Where, because Haitians have a worship song that says, Bon Dieu grand monde fait salver, which translates that, yeah, there we go, the Haitians there. It translates that God is a grown man and he'll do whatever he wants. In other words, there are some things that God does that we don't understand. And he's not obligated to explain everything to us. Our job is not to understand God, our job is to worship him even when we don't understand him. So the leper comes to him and says, I don't understand why you didn't just come to the leper colony and heal me yourself. I don't understand why you set up all these rules that ruined my life. But one thing I do understand is if you're willing, I can be clean. So I don't need all the answers. I just need one answer. Are you willing? And Jesus reaches out, touches him, and says, I will. So far, Jesus is willing to touch you. No matter how dirty you think you are. Jesus is willing to go above and beyond for you. And thirdly, Jesus is willing, obviously in this story, to heal you. He touches the man and leprosy leaves him. He heals him immediately. And it shows that not only is Jesus able to heal, but he's willing to heal. And here at Nyack, we believe that Jesus heals today. It's not just something he did in the Bible back in the day, but he still heals today, and he still wants to heal today. So one story among many stories I want to share is a time where Siobhan and I were praying for a student for healing after chapel. And the student asked, hey, can you pray for me? My back is hurting because I've been in a car accident. So we're like, cool, let's pray for them. Now, honestly, to be honest with you, in that moment when she asked me, I wasn't really feeling it. I don't remember what was happening, but like the way the spiritual Wi-Fi was set up, like I just wasn't feeling connected. So I was like, whatever, like, well, I'll pray for you anyway and see what happens. But the faith level was like, and so she's asked for prayer, so we pray. And a few minutes later, she said, oh my goodness, like I feel it. Like my back, the pain is gone, like I'm healed. And my first response was, really? Like, I know it's spiritual formation, but you don't have to like fake, you don't get extra credit, like it's okay. But she said, no, like seriously, like I'm freaking out, like I'm really healed, like I can move, like it's crazy. And the point is, I didn't really have that much faith for that, but God still healed her. Because it doesn't matter what I felt, what I wanted, God still wants to heal. And he still wants to heal you today, whether it's an emotional issue or physical issue. God wants to heal. Now, we can't talk about Jesus healing without talking about the times that Jesus doesn't heal. Like, what do you do when you pray and some people over here get healed, and then you pray over here and people don't get healed? Does that mean that God doesn't really want to heal? And an unrelated note, I used to love watching my parents argue over what to have for dinner when I was little. And it would start off something like this. My mom would say, I'm hungry. And my dad would be like, all right, let's have some pizza. And my mom would say, I don't want pizza. And my dad would say, well, let's have McDonald's. And my mom would say, I don't want McDonald's. And my dad would say, let's have Wendy's. And my mom would be like, that's the same thing. I don't want Wendy's either. And then my dad would say this, then you're not hungry. Because if you were hungry, then you would eat something. And my mom would drop this nugget of wisdom. I am hungry. I just don't want to eat any of those things. Have you ever felt that way? Ladies, you ever had that argument with your boyfriend? And so, I think sometimes we do the same thing with God. Well, we'll pray for a couple of people and they won't get healed, and then we'll step back and say, well, God must not want to heal anyone. Because if he did, he would have healed them. But maybe God does want to heal, but sometimes he just doesn't want to heal at this particular time or in this particular way. But it doesn't change the fact that he still wants to heal. And now, our job is to come to him for healing, assuming that he will, until he proves us otherwise. Because at the end of the day, he still wants to heal. So Jesus he's willing to touch you, despite how dirty you think you are. He's willing to go above and beyond for you. He's willing to heal you. And lastly, Jesus, after he heals the man, he does this. Reached out to him, saying, I will be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed, and Jesus said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priests, and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. Jesus tells the leper, listen, I just healed you, now go and show yourself to the priest. Because in that time, in Jesus' day, whenever someone was sick, people assumed that you got sick because you were living in sin and God punished you, and if you hadn't been so nasty, that wouldn't have happened to you. That was the mentality they had. And sometimes we feel the same way today. You see a homeless person, well, if you had made the right life choices, that wouldn't have happened. Earthquake in Haiti, well, that's because they were doing voodoo. Like, we have that mentality. And when in reality, sometimes life just happens. Like, it's regardless whether it's sin or not, like, sometimes just doo-doo happens. Like, we live in a fallen world. And Jesus knew that. And so he went to the guy and told him, listen, I healed you. Go show yourself to the priest, because the curse that they put on you, I'm taking it off. The condemnation they put on you, I'm taking it off. The guilt, the shame that they put on you, I'm taking it off. Because no matter what you've done, Jesus is willing to forgive you. You might have been cast out because of what you've done in your past, and people found out about it and they cast you out. But Jesus is still willing to forgive you. Or even if you've been around people who have been accepting and have still loved you, you may have cast yourself out and think, well, you don't know what I did, like, even though God can forgive, like I can't forgive myself, kind of thing. Jesus is still willing to forgive you. Doesn't matter what you've done. He has the Backstreet Boy mentality. I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you did. You know the lyrics. He's still willing to forgive you. And so, Jesus, no matter how dirty you feel, he's willing to touch you. No matter what you need, he's willing to go above and beyond for you. No matter what you're experiencing, he's willing to heal you. And no matter what you have done in your past, he's willing to forgive you. So I want to invite the worship team to come up and the prayer team to come up. And if you are in a place today and you feel like you're dirty, you feel like you need a fresh touch from God, but you feel like you're too dirty for Him to touch, I want you to come to the front and we'll pray for you. Or if you feel like you have a particular need and you need Jesus to step in and go above and beyond for you, I want you to come to the front and we'll pray for you. Or if you have a pain, whether it's emotional pain or physical pain, and you need healing, come to the front and we'll pray for you. Or if you've done something that you're ashamed of and you're wondering if God will forgive you for this, come to the front and we'll pray for you. And I'm going to pray a prayer of blessing over all of you, and afterwards you'll be dismissed. But if you want to come to the front for prayer after I finish praying, then please come to the front and we will pray with you. So Jesus, we praise you because we know that you are willing to do above all that we ask and think. And I pray that whatever, regardless of whatever anyone in this room is going through, that they would know that you are willing to intervene in their lives, that you are willing to step in, and that your power would ring louder than their pain, that your voice would ring louder than the voices in their heads, and that they would know that you are willing to help them. I pray this in your name. Amen. You are dismissed.